You say that calorie counting is a trap. What do you mean by that?
It's like a psyop, man. I think calories might be a psyop. It's like, I mean, we were just talking about this before the podcast, but the history of the calorie is so interesting. A calorie is a measure of heat. And it was originally, you know this, but maybe your audience doesn't. It was originally devised or came from a guy named Wilbur Atwater in the late 1890s. And he basically put foods into a bomb calorimeter, burned them up, and looked to see how much heat a food creates. And then throughout the 120 years that have followed, a calorie has gradually been adopted into our society. In the 1920s and 1940s, in World War I and World War II, it was used for rationing and for troops to give some sort of an indication of how much of a calorie content was in foods. But it's essentially a metric that doesn't really apply to the foods we eat. And then in the probably basically 50s through the 70s, it became the context or the subject of dietary books. And then you had Weight Watchers and Jenny Craig. And the idea was if you limit the amount of calories you eat, that is the way to lose weight. But what we know now, I mean, there are meta-analyses of 80 plus studies of calorie counting. What we know very clearly from those huge studies and from TV shows like the famous The Biggest Loser, that when you employ calorie counting as a weight loss method, 80 to 90% of people regain the weight in 5 years. It just doesn't work because the human body is really smart. And we have this historical, ancestral, evolutionary programming that doesn't want us to restrict calories. We get something called adaptive thermogenesis, where the thyroid actually turns down the body's thermostat when you restrict calories. So you restrict calories, you lose weight in the short term, but then your metabolism goes down and you burn less calories. So it doesn't really work long term, but the story gets worse. And did you know that in 2015, Coca-Cola was revealed to have funded something called the Global Energy Balance Network? This idea of energy balance, calories in, calories out, is probably funded and propped up by ultra-processed food companies. So we know from the 1960s and 70s that something called the Sugar Research Foundation secretly funded researchers at Harvard to shift the blame away from sugar towards saturated fat. And then, 10 years ago, in a New York Times article, Coca-Cola is seen as guilty for trying to kind of promote this narrative of calories in, calories out. It's okay to drink this Coke. You just need to exercise more on the back end or just restrict your calories. But we know now with the research that it doesn't work, right? You cannot restrict calories without attention to food quality and hope to improve your health or lose weight long term. So that's so interesting to me that it's this kind of strange history. We make energy from food, from electrons in glucose and in fatty acids, and sometimes from amino acids. And those electrons turn into intermediates like NADH and FADH2 that are used in the electron transport chain in the mitochondria, and then you make ATP. That's how we make energy. We don't make energy from burning a bagel in our stomach and getting heat out of it. So it's strange that we use a heat metric to count calories. And I think still in the prevailing thinking of people today, when they're overweight, they're thinking, I'm eating too much. And what do? They try to restrict calories. I mean, Weight Watchers is still alive today, right? And the tragedy there is that unless you have attention to food quality, it doesn't work long-term for weight loss. It's so interesting.
So you're saying the human body is not like a bomb calorimeter?
We are not little bomb calorimeters. It doesn't work that way. And we probably get more energy from fat, we know that, than we do carbohydrates. But to measure the amount of energy that you get from a food simply based on the amount of heat it produces when you incinerate that food in a bomb calorimeter doesn't take into context co-occurring micronutrients, minerals and vitamins and whole foods, doesn't take into context your stress environment, doesn't take into context your metabolism, your weightlifting, or any of these things that have to do with how many calories your body burns, right? So this idea of calories in, calories out, it appeals to the first law of thermodynamics, right? This conservation of energy. Yes, if you eat less energy, you will lose weight. But we know that the body is so much more complex than that. And when you say calories in, calories out, it sounds good from a thermodynamics perspective, but it misses this nuance that you start to see when you look at where calories have come from. And you see that basically the quality of the calories you put in affects the calories out. Because what we know now is that when you eat higher quality food, which is less processed food, the calories out changes, right? You will burn more calories when you are eating better quality food. Your body adjusts to this. And similarly, when you eat lower quality food, especially if you're calorie restricting lower quality food, your body turns down the thermostat at the level of the thyroid, adaptive thermogenesis, you burn less calories. So where does that come into the calories in, calories out equation? But Global Energy Balance Network, guess who's funding this narrative in the zeitgeist? Guess who wants you to believe that it's just about restricting calories? And guess who doesn't want you to understand what real food quality is? Because I think that's the way to really get healthy and lose weight long term. And nobody ever talks about that, right?
You know what? This has got me thinking about my very expensive nutritional science class in college. And this was the first day of school stuff. Like, he's teaching the class, if you want to lose weight, you just need to expend more energy than you take in. If you want to gain weight, then you're going to consume more energy than you burn. And if you want to stay the same weight, it's going to balance out. It's just math. Taking out all of these human factors. Earlier you mentioned the impact of the thyroid. We've got multiple studies on this that somebody can consume, two different people, the same quote calorie intake that it says on the food,
calories,
and they can absorb hundreds more calories or less calories than a person doing the same exact thing. And this also reminded me, we'll put this study up for everybody to see. When you mentioned the food quality impact, the calories in, the quality of those calories in impact the calories out. That is a game changer for everybody to get. And this was published in Food and Nutrition Research. And scientists had test subjects to consume two different types of sandwiches. One made of ultra processed versions of food, so like a cheese product and highly refined bread. And then one was whole grain bread and cheddar cheese. And what the researchers found was that when individuals consumed the ultra processed version of that sandwich, they burned far less calories after consuming that sandwich. What consuming those ultra processed food did was create what they referred to sort of like a hormonal clog. It kind of gummed up the system so their body wasn't expending that energy.
It's essentially poisonous, right? I mean, that's a high level, overly simplified way to think about it. But these ultra processed foods, which are sold to us as okay in moderation, are potentially really damaging the very mechanisms by which we convert food into energy. And that all moves through the mitochondria. And so when we clog the mitochondria up, when we sort of damage our ability to move food into usable energy, that gets stored as fat at a high level. Obviously, I'm oversimplifying, but why do we get fat? I think we get fat because we can't make potential energy in food into kinetic energy in energy through the mitochondria, right? So food is potential energy. And whether we measure that potential energy as electrons in glucose or fatty acids that go through glycolysis, that go through the process of glycolysis and then the Krebs cycle and beta oxidation to make the intermediates that move through the mitochondria, or we measure it in other ways, like if that potential energy doesn't move through the mitochondria, it just doesn't work, right? We don't have the energy on the back end that's usable. That's essentially ATP. So somewhere along the way, we are storing fat. We are storing energy from the food we're eating as fat. And that's such an amazing study. The quality of the food impacts that in every way. And the quality of the food we eat also impacts our hunger. So this is another interesting piece, is that humans are driven by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution around hunger cues. We do not want to be hungry. I think of this as like a calorie restriction prison, and you are going to break out of that prison however you can. You can definitely lose weight eating donuts or pizza, but you are going to be hungry and irritable and eventually micronutrient depleted. And there's a great study by Kevin Hall at the NIH where he took two groups of people and everything was controlled for, and he presented them with the same amount of calories and the same matched protein, fat, salt. They tried to match for as many aspects of the food as they can, very similar to the study you're mentioning. Yeah. But they gave whole meals over the course of 2 weeks. And one was ultra processed and one was essentially unprocessed. So you could imagine, one meal is like a filet of fish sandwich with tartar sauce and French fries and Coke. And the other meal is like salmon plus vegetables. And they're trying to match for everything. But then they let people eat as much as they wanted. And what happened was that on the ultra processed side, people ate 500 plus calories per more per day. And by the end of 2 weeks, they had gained multiple pounds, 2 to 3 pounds extra weight, just because they were hungrier. The satiety was kicking in. These are evolutionary mechanisms that are so hard for humans, free living humans, to really fight against. And you can fight against them in the short term, but ultimately there's something about the processing of food, whether it's the stripping away of the micronutrients or this food matrix effects in terms of satiety hormones, that makes us hungrier, gives us less satiety, causes us to become micronutrient depleted, which is a whole nother issue. And then over time, we're just going to eat more. And so again, it all comes back to this global energy balance, nefarious idea, calories in, calories out. And you're thinking, no, that's what's so crazy. And what worries me now is that we're starting to see new incarnations of this. And that's where I get worried. Have you heard about this new ingredient that's in some of these protein bars, EPG, esterified propoxylated glycerol? It's interesting. Do you remember Olestra?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, you remember anal leakage?
Yeah, one of the side effects.
Yes. So Olestra was sort of version 1.0 of this indigestible form of fat. And there's a company called Epig that in 2019 applied for and got granted this generally recognized as safe designation from the FDA for EPG, esterified propoxylated glycerol. Basically, they take canola oil and they separate the fatty acid tails from the glycerol head with a propoxyl molecule. And it makes something that's been described by this company as the texture of warm candle wax. Gives you the mouthfeel of fat, but you can't digest it. That's the same thing that happened with Olestra. So when they've done studies with EPG, it causes all sorts of GI side effects. Like in the papers, it'll say anal spotting, gas with discharge, like akin to the Olestra stuff. And over an 8-week study, it did appreciably decrease absorption of fat-soluble vitamins like beta carotene and vitamin K1. They didn't test for vitamin K2, but surely it decreased vitamin K2 also. So what's scary here is that I think this is the next incarnation of these processed foods. And again, it's all based on this calorie model.
Right.
Calories in, calories out. They're saying EPG has 0.7 calories per gram. It's a indigestible fat that is causing all sorts of GI side effects, stripping you of fat-soluble vitamins, but it only has 0.7 calories per gram. So, and it's crazy. It's going to show up in more and more foods. It's in this bar, this David bar. Have you heard about this David bar? They have this. They're touting this bar as the highest calories per gram. They're saying it has 28 grams of protein and 150 calories because they put this EPG in there, this fake fat that you can't digest. And so it just bothers me because I think that we're going in the wrong direction with these high protein processed foods that are packaged like a wolf in sheep's clothing to be like, hey, the marketing on the David bar literally says, this is protein perfected. It says, it says like, you're not perfect, but or it says, I forget what the actual line is, but it's like David bar is protein perfected. Like something isn't perfect, but the David bar is like it's perfect protein. And again, they're appealing to this perspective, which is get more protein. Okay, we can talk about that, but at the lowest amount of calories possible. And of course it's ultra processed. So there's essentially no micronutrients. It's full of artificial flavors. It has sucralose, which I want to talk about also. So it just worries me because this is the direction that convenience foods are going in. And I think we're going to see this EPG in a ton of different foods really soon. The makers of EPG are actually being sued now because of like a monopoly thing. They're saying that they're monopolizing. I think actually the David bar people are being sued because they bought Epig, the people that make this esterified propoxylated glycerol. And they're trying to monopolize the supply. But previously, chocolate bars, peanut butter spreads, I think we're going to see in the future, once this lawsuit gets settled, a bunch of foods have this EPG in it. I want people to be aware of like how sinister this is because it's basically, like I said, it's depleting you of micronutrients and it's completely the wrong way to go with your food. I mean, if you want high protein, low calories, eat a chicken breast. Eat a piece of sirloin steak, right? Like that's so much better. But I get it. People want convenience. And so I think that there will always be this niche for convenience foods. And I think that people will always be reaching for and grabbing those convenience foods. I was on a plane today. I was in the airport. Every time I'm in the airport, I'm looking at like what's sold. It's all these convenience foods. And I'm thinking like, what are even the good options here? What is the best option in an airport. It's pretty tough. So it's just interesting to me to think like, okay, humans want convenience. We're never going to get around that. But I think that it bothers me when these companies are making this consumer demand they're meeting the consumer demand with lower quality foods packaged as good foods. That's not good to me.
The airport, let alone everywhere else.
Everywhere, yeah, but yeah. The airport is like a microcosm, but yeah.
Exactly. This also reminds me of, this paradigm shift with calories being something that was brought into the fold in the realm of physics early on initially.
Yeah.
It was never really made to be utilized in nutrition because the human body is so complex. And one of the early pioneers of like that there's like a bridge between Atwater and getting it to the public.
Yeah.
And that was Dr. Lulu Hunt Peters. And she wrote really the first major bestseller propagating the importance of minding calories. And it made a shift mentally where we stopped looking at food as food and start looking at it as calories. Right? Now you don't eat bread, you eat 100 calories of bread. Now you don't eat pie, you eat 100 calories of pie. You don't eat butter, you eat 100 calories of butter.
Or 100 calories of Oreos.
Or 100 calories of Oreos and the anal leakage fat or whatever. You just start looking at food through that lens and you forget that it's food and it's complex and you're complex. So one of the big takeaways today that I'm hearing from you is that the calorie paradigm, there's some value in finding some minute measurements with this, but it is massively oversimplified.
And I think that it's being leveraged against us. I think there's a sinister component, and we've seen that. 2015, Global Energy Balance Network, Coca-Cola's funding that secretly, and they get exposed. Like, why are they funding the idea of calories in, calories out? Because they're leveraging it against us. That's how Weight Watchers becomes a multi-billion-dollar company. That's how you get sold 100-calorie snack packs of Ritz crackers with cheese or Oreos, and you think, okay, this is how I'm going to lose weight. It's completely leading humans down the wrong path. It's so scary. Did you know that before 1990, calories were not even on the food labels on foods? It's only been in the last 35 years. I mean, of most of our lives, but when I was born, I don't remember it, but there were none of the calories were not even on the food labels before 1990. I know a lot of your listeners might not have even been born before 1990, but like, that's crazy to me. This is not like, it's not intrinsic to a food. You have an apple, you have a banana, you have a piece of steak, and you have, a processed bag of Doritos. Like, the idea that those all have calories is a very recent invention. I guess it makes sense from a governmental perspective. I understand the history of World War I, World War II, rationing. We need a way to say, like, how much food are we sending to the soldiers, right? And then, like you said, this dietary strategy is like, you can restrict calories. And it does work in the short term, but we know from these meta-analyses and studies and Biggest Loser, time and time again, if you try and lose weight by restricting calories without having attention to food quality, you will fail. Yeah. And so it bothers me that there's this calories in, calories out idea is being leveraged against people. And that the only innovation that I see happening, or a lot of the innovation that I see happening, is toward foods that are packaged as healthy or better for you that are not.
You mentioned sucralose earlier.
Yeah.
And this got me thinking, and I want to ask you about this, and maybe this can be a bridge for that conversation. There's also multiple studies, and even there are many that are being conducted now. And I've actually had some of these researchers that are doing this work in the lab on the impact of the microbiome makeup and how your body associates with calories as well.
Oh, yeah.
And so sucralose got me thinking about some potential impact with the microbiome. So let's talk about sucralose in this whole equation.
So the artificial sweeteners are pretty interesting. So there's sucralose, which is Splenda. There's ACE-K. There's aspartame. And those are the three big ones. And then there's stevia and monk fruit, which are a separate conversation. But the ACE-K, sucralose, aspartame definitely affect the microbiome. Definitely. There's clear evidence that they disrupt or change quorum sensing, which is the ability for bacteria to communicate within your gut, right? So they're going to change the quorum sensing. But a recent study just came out showing that sucralose actually changes blood flow in the brain. And this is crazy because it changes blood flow to the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus, as you know, is where the satiety centers are. And so the conclusion of the study was, hey, sucralose is probably making you hungrier by changing blood flow to your brain center for satiety. And of course, David Bar has sucralose in it. Definitely all these protein forward Pop-Tarts, not all of them, but a lot. Most of the protein forward bars, cereals also have artificial sweeteners because the marketing is zero sugar, high protein. I'm going to add on absolutely micronutrient devoid, but that's how these things are being marketed, zero sugar. So consumers still want something that tastes sweet. So they're almost all going to have sucralose, ACE-K, and aspartame. And now we have a study saying sucralose is actually changing the way your brain interprets and the brain responds. Again, calories in, calories out. Not all calories or even non-caloric molecules affect us in the same way. This is the problem. And so I've been talking about artificial sweeteners for years. And I would get pushbacks from time to time. People would say, hey, Paul, there are meta-analyses that show that diet soda versus sugar soda actually is weight neutral or improves weight loss. And you're going, okay, but look at this mechanistically. It's a broader context. And I think that sometimes, and not surprisingly, these same people that would push back on me, and look, I love nutritional conversations. We all learn from each other. I'm open to people disagreeing with my ideas respectfully. But the same people that would disagree with me on artificial sweeteners are also the people who will make posts saying you can lose weight eating donuts and pizza and it's calories in, calories out. Why don't you guys understand thermodynamics? So I think there's just kind of like, there's almost two camps now. And I hate that nutritional science and medicine has become so tribal, but there's like this calories in, calories out camp. And a lot of these people are the same people behind these new bars that are having low quality ingredients. And then I really feel like I need to be beating the drum for just high quality food and saying, okay, that doesn't work. What's the answer? Eat real food. But I get that people want convenience too. But I think that at a high level, if we're not even talking about convenience foods, because we'll come back to convenience foods, like I think the answer for people is so simple. And the answer is really just eat meat and eat plants. Eat unprocessed food. It's so simple. Like I've talked about this. I don't know if I stole this from someone, but it's like I call it the great grandmother rule, so eat single ingredient foods, eat milk, eat eggs, eat meat, eat plants, right? They're single ingredients. They don't even have a nutrition label. Or if you're going to eat a food that has a nutrition label, eat ingredients that your great grandmother would recognize. My great grandmother doesn't know what esterified propoxylated glycerol is, right? Like my great grandmother doesn't know or didn't know what sucralose is. And so don't eat foods that have complex ingredients that your great grandmother that 2 generations ago or 3 would not know what these foods are. It's so simple, right? It's unprocessed foods. It's simple. That's what I mean when I say food quality. High quality food is essentially unprocessed food. But then people will say, well, what's a processed food? Ground beef is processed. Look, everybody knows what a processed food is versus, everybody knows that like, okay, ground beef is different than a Snickers bar. But we can tell the difference here. It's not rocket science.
Yeah. Listen, my great grandmother, and number one, the fact that she lived that long to where I got to hang out with her quite a bit, ride the senior citizen bus with her and all that stuff.
Wow.
My grandmother as well had a garden and my grandfather hunted, but my great grandmother, same thing. She had these inputs, but it was in that transition period in the 80s. I grew up in the 80s. On one of those senior citizen bus trips to the grocery store, she got me Fruity Pebbles. She was my first memory of that bowl of cereal because she wanted to make me happy. I picked it out. It had a cartoon character that I liked, Fred Flintstone, toy in the box. This is what I want. Momo, we called her Momo. And we headed back to her place and I had that bowl of cereal. It changed my life.
Dopamine explosion.
Yeah.
How old were you?
It's probably about 4.
I mean, you think a 4-year-old, how does a 4-year-old differentiate? How does a 4-year-old understand the dopaminergic response that comes from a processed food like this? I don't have kids right now, but I have a niece and a nephew and they're 5 and 7. And my sister's pretty darn good about feeding them good quality foods. But in their earlier years, I could see it with them. It's just like when you see children that are that young, this is again, leaning onto evolutionary mechanisms and human consciousness, human reward pathways in the brain that are hundreds of thousands of years old.
Right.
There was no such thing as Fruity Pebbles 100,000 years ago, right? There was a ripe berry at certain times of the year. There was honey if you smoked the bees out of a hive. There was meat, but that was the level of dopamine, the level of reward that you would get from a food. And now foods are engineered. You've probably talked about this on other shows. They're intentionally engineered to overload our dopamine. So you give that kind of food to a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old, what are they going to do? Their dopamine is going through. It is legal drugs. It's legal drugs being given to kids. And that sounds hyperbolic, but it's so true, because that 4-year-old, and I'm just imagining, I know what happened to my niece and nephew. The next time they don't get that dopamine, there's a behavioral problem, That's a temper tantrum. And now mom and dad it's hard. So these manufacturers are just making it harder and harder. And you can see it's a full circle.
Yeah.
This is Fred Flintstone and a toy. What kid could resist that?
Yeah.
And I was talking to a friend of mine who's in the UK, and he was saying the same thing. He has a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, I think, and he said they watch, I think it was Pepper the Pig, which is maybe a UK cartoon character. Peppa the Pig. Maybe it's in the States too then, huh? And he said they go to the grocery store and they see Peppa and they want that cereal. And you think, this cartoon is created to sell the product.
Yes.
Wait a minute now.
Yes.
That's sinister. They don't just create a cartoon. And I wonder how much of what we see in our society is reverse engineered in that way.
Yeah.
They're saying, we're going to make an animated movie for the back end toy sales. Certainly with this cartoon, you think it's not, obviously if Peppa the Pig gets people to watch this cartoon on TV, you get revenue from commercials. But I bet the real hit is when kids go to the grocery store and you're licensing it on cereals and stuff. That's where it gets to be scary. So you can see between Global Energy Balance Network, the calorie, potentially PSYOP, the way that we're feeding kids at such a young age, we are set up for failure, man. And the solution is simple, but the path is challenging. It's like you just have to go back to eating what we ate even 150 years ago.
Yeah. And again, we know this stuff already. There's been studies done on this. One of them took cereal specifically and had kids come in and have these 2 bowls of cereal, not knowing that they're the same bowl of cereal.
Oh, really?
But in one setting, they had a cartoon on the box for the cereal. In one setting, they didn't have the cartoon character mascot. And the kids rated, and they use a 5-point smiley face scale. They rated the cereal that had the cartoon character far superior. They said that it tasted better.
Oh my God.
And this was a cereal that they would choose over the other. And it was based on the marketing. And so these food manufacturers and marketing agencies, they are some evil geniuses in many ways. And specifically with food you said it very, explicitly, food engineering. There's brilliant food scientists who are finding ways to bypass, even if you have a staunch, strict belief in calories, to utilize vanishing caloric density to mess with your brain so you can eat these calories and your brain is like, no, I didn't.
Sucralose.
Yeah.
Perfect example, sucralose. And I think that it's just, it's all being leveraged against us. And the history of RJ Reynolds and some of these other cigarette companies in the 80s and 90s that moved from cigarettes to processed food. And so the cigarette addictive playbook was then leveraged into the processed food industry. And they all got out in the early 2000s, but the stamp was left, the indelible mark was left, and all the other processed food companies followed suit. So you see a massive change, and it's really happened before my eyes and before your eyes. Within our lifetime, Shawn, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010, into this decade, it's happened within our lifetime. Even to the 1960s and 1970s, processed food was nothing like it is today. So it's had this metamorphosis, and I think it affects both children and adults. And so we talked about the kids, but I think that the other piece, the parallel piece for adults, is the convenience piece. So I think they get us. These manufacturers get us when we're kids with cartoon characters and chemicals, food dyes. And it's so cool to see these food dyes coming out. Did you see that Kraft Heinz is going to remove food dyes? Props to, this is bipartisan, no political leanings here, but this administration has pressured these companies to get food dyes out. Small step, this is a big deal because these food dyes absolutely make that food more desirable to a kid when it's brighter. That's evolution, man. That berry is really red. It's ripe. I'm going to go eat it, of course. But I think that at an adult level, they get us at convenience. So just like kids, they get us with cartoon characters. As adults, they get us with convenience. Because I was at the gym a couple of days ago, maybe 2 days ago, I'm in St. Pete right now in Florida, hanging out with my girlfriend a little bit. And I met a guy and he was like, hey, I love your work. And he was like, I do the animal-based diet a lot. Sometimes I go off. And I like to talk to people and hear their story. And I said, why did you go off? And he says, convenience. And I hear it so often, Shawn. It's like convenience is the enemy for us, but I get it. Like, I think that we've just all become a part of a society that's quite fast paced. And so the convenience factor that's the lever for adults. The kids get the cartoons, the adults get convenience. So if you make a food convenient, we are more likely to eat it. And because I've offered a solution, which is eat steak, eat hamburger, eat chicken, eat fish, eat eggs, eat milk, eat fruit and vegetables. And I know people listening are saying, I don't have time to do that all the time, right? Like I'm a single mom or a single dad, or I work 2 jobs, I have 3 kids, maybe it's like, okay, so I get it. People need the convenience. And so it's a big deal. And so it makes me, I don't know, it makes me kind of frustrated that most of the convenience foods out there are just not going in the right direction. So, I mean, this is a big deal. I don't like to talk about this stuff too much, but like I will mention that like this is one of the reasons that I built Lineage, because I feel really proud of what we've done with this company, and the fact that like when I looked at convenience foods, there just wasn't that much out there. And so I just think it's cool that we've been able to create a company. And I mean, over the years, I never thought I'd be in a position to do this, but it feels good to have some agency to actually bring something to life and to create healthy foods that are convenient. We make like meat sticks and jerky and this kind of stuff, and it's grass fed. And so I think like, okay, Lineage is my effort to fight against like processed food companies. And granted, yes, it's a company, it's a business, it makes money. That's great. But like, I want it to be the spark of a movement, and other companies to come out and do the same thing and realize there's a huge amount of people that want healthier foods, and to not just be stuck in a grocery store looking at an aisle of like protein candy bars that are just horrible for you.
Mm-hmm. What are a couple of things that are unique with Lineage? What some unique products?
Oh man, so we brought you some. Yeah. So the first product we made was our meat sticks, and we went to Australia to source these from grass-fed, grass-finished farms, and these are regenerative cows in Australia. And I had never been to Australia, but what I saw outside of Southern Australia, outside of Melbourne, they actually say like Melbourne, but like in the Victoria region, was the greenest grass I've ever seen. I looked at cows. I went to a farm that actually raises cows that we source from, and those cows had a view to the ocean. It was $1 million view for the cows. There's cows grazing, looking at the sea. They're looking toward Tasmania in Australia. So like we sourced like really, really high quality grass-fed regenerative meat, and then we did 52 or 53 trials of the meat sticks to get them right. So they're different than they're not a cooked meat stick, it's a dried meat stick. So it has a totally different flavor. And we were able to sneak in some organs in there, some heart and liver. And then the other one that people really love is just the air dried steak, which is like a pure jerky. And it's like a thinly sliced, but it's from the same meat. So it's just like a really high quality thing. But all the products we make at Lineage, they're all things that I would eat. And I am one of the pickiest humans on the planet. When we made honey, we made a raw, organic, glyphosate-free honey. We tested it for glyphosate. Very few honeys are actually tested for glyphosate. And when we actually looked at the supply in the US, a lot of the US organic honeys actually were contaminated with glyphosate, which is this herbicide that's cross-contaminating between fields and stuff. And so it's really cool. I'm really proud of what we built. We built like a suite of products. We have a tallow, a honey, we have a protein powder, we have meat sticks and jerky, all kinds of good stuff. We just released a coffee. We have collagen powder. I don't drink coffee, but when we did a coffee, we did organic, mold-free, pesticide-free, like regeneratively raised. So it's just cool to be able to bring that to life. That feels good to me. Yes, it's a business, but it's awesome to make. I think that we live in a society where it's a way that I get to express this is the highest quality food that I want to make available to people. If we didn't do it, it's not really available.
Yeah. When you mentioned the cows having this view of the ocean,
it's cool.
I was thinking about just these natural inputs that we evolved having as humans. And one of those inputs is sunlight.
Yeah.
And you came in here with the crisp tan and, coming from Florida, and just this is one of the things that's been a staple in your life. And when some people hear about your time that you spend in the sun, they get concerned. Shouldn't you be hiding from the sun? Because again, getting a little bit of sun, sure, I can get, but the amount of time that you spend in the sun playing, having fun, training, hanging out, should we be fearing the sun? Paul, talk about this.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, look, I'm 47 years old. I'm going to be 48 in like 2 weeks. And I've lived in Costa Rica primarily for the last 4 years. I probably I'm still spend the majority of my time in Costa Rica, but I'm just in St. Pete for a little bit right now. And for the first couple of years I surfed in Costa Rica, I did not use any sunscreen on my face when I was surfing. I probably should have used like a good sunscreen. So there's all sorts of levels to the sunscreen and the sun conversation. So look, I'm 47 years old. I've spent my life in the sun. I've got wrinkles, but what's the flip side? Like, should we fear the sun? I say absolutely not. The human body makes vitamin D in the sun, but we also make endorphins, nitric oxide, and other compounds. We make a sulfated cholesterol at the level of the skin. It's a precursor for vitamin D in the sun. And the endorphin connection has always been interesting to me, right? Why would the sun be bad for us? Obviously, dose is important. You can give yourself hyponatremia by drinking too much water. I think humans and all animals understand when they should move out of the sunlight. And some of us don't move out of the sunlight and we get burned. So don't get burned. But we make a compound in the human body that is linked with good feelings, endorphins, when we are in the sun. I did my residency after medical school in Seattle, Shawn. So I haven't had this feeling as much in the last 4 years of my life because I'm very sun, quote, rich in Costa Rica and Florida. But in Seattle, I would spend most of my time indoors in the hospital on call. And for 90 days in the summer in Seattle, you get sun. And it was viscerally pleasurable to walk outside into the sun for that short amount. So I think most humans who are sun deprived will have experienced this objectively. Sun feels good, right? The sun is not there to kill you. The sun is there for us to get nutrients. Before the advent of vitamin D supplements, we needed the sun to get vitamin D. Now we sort of have a bypass, but not really. I'll talk about limitations of vitamin D supplements in a minute, but it viscerally feels good for us to be in the sun. I think that we all have a genetic background that affects how much we can be in the sun. You're darker skinned than me at baseline, so you can be in the sun more. We have different ancestries. If you are from Norwegian or Northern Europe descent, you are a very efficient sun harvester. You don't need to be in the sun as much, right? If you are from the equatorial regions, your body has evolved to protect you from the sun, and you might need to be in the sun more to get the same amount of ultraviolet light and the benefits of the sun. So we can all place ourselves within that sort of contextual timeline and decide how much we want to be in the sun. But I think that there are so many benefits. And if you look at this specifically, this is actually to both of these points, vitamin D and the benefits of the sun. There's research in animal models. I've never seen this in humans, but there's research in animal models that UV radiation has benefits with regard to weight loss that vitamin D supplements do not have. So I suspect there's something going on here. It's never been studied in humans, either positively or negatively. But back to weight loss, this conversation, ultraviolet light in animals mitigates some of the negative effects of the harmful food that they feed most animals, this animal chow, and improves weight loss more than a vitamin D supplement. So, okay, you can't fake that. Obviously, if you're not in the sun, you want to get vitamin D. Lots of benefits to vitamin D in the human body. But I think there are other benefits to being in ultraviolet light. This is actually pretty parallel to our conversation about processed and whole foods. I think about indoor lighting and outdoor lighting as processed foods or processed sun, processed light, and whole food light in parallel, right? So you think about outdoor light. It doesn't flicker. It's all the visible spectrum, and it's not enriched in blue, right? It's just a balance of visible spectrum. It has ultraviolet and infrared wavelengths. Those are two sides of the spectrum. Indoor light, flickering, enriched in blue, no infrared, no UV. It's like a processed light, right? It's a completely different set of light than humans are used to. And look, I'm willing to sit under these processed lights with you because I like you and it's fun hanging out with you and I hope people benefit from this conversation. But if we are spending the majority of our time indoors under processed light, might there be negative side effects to this? And I think there are, right? I had a guy on my podcast, Tristan Scott, and he said something that was so interesting. He told me that infrared light, which is outdoors and not indoors ever, unless you're under an infrared light panel, like a red light panel, benefits us at the level of the mitochondria. So the mitochondria systemically, not just in the brain, make melatonin when we are exposed to infrared light. And that melatonin is used protectively as an antioxidant systemically in the human body. So wait, sunlight is bad for you. No, wait. Like infrared light makes melatonin, ultraviolet light, and infrared are probably part of the same equation. Infrared light in whole food sunlight is probably protective against ultraviolet light. So this made me reconsider something that I did in residency, which probably was not a good decision, which was a tanning bed. So in a tanning bed, I was desperate, man. I was desperate. I was in Seattle. A tanning bed is really enriched in UV, but doesn't have enough IR, infrared. So this is the difference. And I thought, okay, that might have also caused some photo aging for me. And I thought, okay, maybe it's because for the longest time, I thought, are tanning beds good or bad? I think ultraviolet light is okay for humans as long as we don't overuse it. A tanning bed is very easy to overuse. We don't have any sense of this until you get out of the bed and you're red. I've had a couple of tanning bed burns in my life, I'm embarrassed to say. But sunlight has infrared plus UV, and those probably complement each other. So it's protective. So it's really interesting to me to think about this whole light and process light. And the idea is not live outside all the time, but make sure you're getting time outdoors and understand the potential harms or potential, I think, burden that comes with indoor light, especially around sleep. I mean, you've written a book about sleep. You understand blue light at night and flickering light at night is something that I am very sensitive to. I actually changed my cell phone because the older iPhones have a different pulse width modulation. We don't have to get too detailed here, but the way that it flickers on an iPhone 11 is different than an iPhone 15 or 16. So I'll just add this. This might be too granular for people, but a MacBook Pro is actually not bad in terms of flicker. A MacBook Pro flickers so fast that your body perceives it as constant light or more close to constant light. But iPhones are particularly bad. The pulse width modulation on an iPhone at night for flickering is very disruptive to people's sympathetic nervous system and the circadian rhythm. So if you have to work at night, you want to be looking at your MacBook Pro. I'm not affiliated with Apple, but not your iPhone, because they have different pulse width modulation. They flicker at different rates. So I think a lot about flickering of lights also in addition to the blue. And the last thing I'll say here, which is really fascinating, and I can't not talk about it, is incandescent lights. Remember these bulbs we had growing up, an Edison bulb? The way an Edison bulb works is a tungsten filament that gets hot. It goes to 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit when you run a current through it. And a tungsten filament incandescent bulb still flickers because the current in our outlets is alternating current. It's about 120 hertz. It's still flickering technically 120 times a second because of this alternating current, but because it has thermal inertia, it's on fire. The tungsten filament is sort of on fire. It doesn't switch on and off completely, and your body perceives an incandescent light as steady light, like outdoors. An incandescent light bulb is essentially fire in a bottle. So it's the closest thing you can get to outdoor light indoors. So we've gone away in so many ways, Shawn. We've gone to processed foods and we've gone to processed light. And there are governmental stipulations, energy regulations, right? We have to balance it all. We've gone, I would say, to less healthy but more efficient lights. So we're sacrificing our human health for an energy payoff in the end, right? An LED light is more efficient, but I would say less healthy for humans. So I've kind of meandered my way away from sunlight, but you think like incandescent lights are healthier for humans than LEDs. The last thing I'll say is this: LED lights, when they go on and off, they go completely on and off. An incandescent light looks more like this, right? It's a wave and your body perceives it as steady light. LED lights do this. So it's very jarring for our central nervous system when it does that. And then sunscreen, you have to think like if you're outside in the sun, what kind of sunscreen are you using? Most sunscreens are full of oxybenzone, avobenzone, octocrylene, this long list of chemicals that we know are absorbed through the skin, excreted in the poop, potentially associated with endocrine disruption and cancer. So if you want to be in the sun for long amounts of time, I surf every day in Costa Rica, you either have to wear protective clothing or like a zinc-based, mineral-based sunscreen is much better than a chemical-based sunscreen. But the long-winded answer to your question is no, we should not fear the sun. Context matters.
Absolutely. I'm glad you spent some time on that, because this is one of the major fields that health is moving towards, is paying attention to circadian rhythms and circadian medicine overall. And the Salk Institute has affirmed that thousands of our genes are regulated by light, right? And so if we're talking about the expression of certain symptoms, positive or, things that we don't want to happen, there's a huge implication for these light inputs and regulating what our bodies are doing at any given time, because our bodies are always trying to sync up to this 24-hour solar day, how we evolved again for thousands and thousands of years. But now we're manufacturing these artificial conditions and it's throwing these clocks off. So you're not producing the hormones when you want them to be produced. Your cortisol is too high at this time and too low at this time. Testosterone is not getting produced properly. The list goes on, let alone our hunger and satiety cues as well. And that's specifically why I brought up the Salk Institute. And so they were sharing some data on how light impacts our association with food and our appetite. And again, even if you think about this, we've got some really interesting data on, you kind of like tiptoed into this a little bit, but how the sun influences our appetite. It is a powerful regulator of our appetite and our food choices, right? We want to eat different shit when we're in the sun for a while. And chances are you don't want to eat a glizzy. You know what a glizzy is, right?
No, a glizzy.
It's a hot dog. It's what the kids call a hot dog now. So yeah, it's like your appetite changes.
Yeah.
And also the sun, spending time in the sun, especially if you haven't been in the sun for a while, people fall asleep like immediately on their vacation. They're just knocked out. Yeah. Getting that sun input is just like, well, isn't this a daytime thing? Like, shouldn't you be sleeping at night, whatever? But it's like helping to sync certain things up, like serotonin channels. And you mentioned these pathways. Serotonin is a precursor for melatonin, but just helping our bodies to sync up, this coherence happens. And sometimes that coherent hit to your nervous system can get your ass to just totally shut down, get some anabolic stimulus going, some healing going. And we need the sun. Like, this is what creates life here on Earth. And so being scared of it is a little bit silly. Of course, we don't want to get burned. We don't want to overstay our welcome. But it's just being mindful, and some of those tips that you shared are super helpful.
Yeah, I think the biggest things are, you talked about it, getting outside first thing in the morning, getting that circadian biology in your eyes, that bright light in the eye to set their circadian rhythm, and then being outside throughout the day, trying to get as much natural light as you can. If you're working indoors, try and work under as many incandescent light as you can. Have a window. If you can have the window open, depending on the time of year and the temperature, an open window allows some infrared radiation to come in. There's another hack that's actually pretty funny that I've done. It's not super feasible for most people. Have you seen these? Do you have chickens?
I don't.
You ever had lizard growing up? Remember those there are these red lights they sell on Amazon. They're lizard lights, right? They're like these warmer lizard lights. And some of them actually have some UV, but you can get them just like as pure infrared. And you put them in lizard cages, because when you bring a lizard, an animal that is meant to be outdoors, into your house, it will die unless you supplement it with the proper amount of light and the right wavelengths of light. But you can take those lizard lights, those red, I think they're halogen bulbs. They put out a lot of infrared, and you can sit next to them while you're working to get more infrared radiation while you're indoors. It looks pretty funny. I did a story about it. People were really interested, because if I'm sitting in Austin, I remember I was sitting in Austin in January of this past year. It's cold outside. I can't work outside all day, right? I can't work outside at all. They had a cold snap in Austin in January. And so that was around the time I did the podcast with Tristan, and he recommended this to me. So I went on Amazon. They're $20, and you can put I think it's a halogen, or it's at least an incandescent red bulb. It's quite strong, and you can put it right next to you, and it shines a red infrared light on you while you're working. You have to be careful, because they get so hot that it can cause a fire. So it actually burns. You could see like a burn mark on some of the papers that I had it on, because I put it on like papers. But you can get infrared light indoors by doing that. It's kind of a crazy, it gets into the realm of like biohacking, but it's $20. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, I love that. And also just in particular in the evening, red light is probably a lot better than, the stuff that we're currently using.
I mean, if you come into my house at night, it looks like I'm in a lizard's cage, because it's all red lights. It's all red lights. In Costa Rica, because I'm so close to the equator, the sun goes down between 5:15 and 6:15 all year. So the longest day of the year, which is coming up here really soon, is going to be about a 6:15, 6:20 sunset in Costa Rica. So the longest it's going to go down to 6:20. So basically, after the sun goes down, my whole house in Costa Rica is red. I don't have many neighbors around me, but if I did, they'd be like, he's having a party because it's all red, but there's no techno
or
music.
some freaky stuff.
Yeah. Some freaky stuff too, which is great. Like candlelight, red light is great for like romantic times, right? That's why we have candlelight dinners. It's like, it works great in relationships too. Red light is multifactorial. But now in the States, when I'm at a higher latitude, the sun goes down, so late that I don't even really, I just go to, when the sun goes down, I go to sleep. But if I'm in my house after dark, it's all red lights. And it's preferably incandescent red lights that are not flickering or zero flicker LEDs. So there's lots of ways to hack it, but it can be kind of fun, or it's different, it's different. The first time you do it, your house seems like, where are my lights? But you kind of get used to it. I even went as far, and this doesn't really fix the problem, but it made for good content, as putting they sell these plastic sheets on Amazon, and you can put them in your refrigerator. So the refrigerator light, this is maybe like how crazy I am, but at night, I hate going to the refrigerator because the whole house is like dark and chill and red. And you open the refrigerator, oh, it's so bright. Yeah. Boom.
Beam you up.
Yes, it beams you up. So I put a red piece of plastic in the refrigerator at night. It made for good content. I was like, look, even my refrigerator's a red light.
Paul's about that life, man. I love this. This has been so insightful. And, just to pivot back to the Salk Institute. So they have published a lot of data on the impact of light on our genes. And also we've got nutrigenomics, nutrigenetics, and looking at what they shared second to light is as far as like this circadian timing system influencing our genes and our gene expression, which if you're like, what are genes? Well, they're functional genes and proteins essentially, and that regulate other genes and proteins. So if we're talking about these kind of circadian clocks specifically, so these circadian clocks, they're functional genes and proteins themselves that impact our other genes and proteins. Mm-hmm. With that said, they shared that the second most influential thing outside of light being the primary influence over our gene expression, these circadian clock genes, is food, all right? And specifically when you're eating. Mm. And so we started this conversation talking about this calorie paradigm. Let's talk about, if you can, in closing, some best practices. How can we get out of this calorie first mindset? Respect the validity that we do have around calories, right? Giving us a metric to be mindful of. But what are some best practices? Give me 3 things for us to focus on with our nutrition. And including, if you can put into this 3, does when we eat have any influence as well? Yeah,
it definitely does. So I think that the first thing is food quality. And that sounds general, but I want people to understand that's what we talked about earlier with the great grandmother rule. Simple foods, single ingredient foods, meat, plants, foods your great grandmother would recognize. That's the first. That's what high quality food is. That's what food quality means. It's those foods are going to have more micronutrients. They're going to be less industrially processed. Those micronutrients are going to play a role in satiety along with higher quality macronutrients that are more digestible, less toxins, less pesticides, all the things that our body has had and expected for hundreds of thousands of years as humans, as Homo sapiens. So food quality first. And that's really the resounding message that I want people to understand is stop thinking about calories, think about food quality. Food quality is king. If you do not eat high quality foods, you will fail. Your weight loss will fail. And the magical piece of this is that when food quality is increased, a lot of times other things get better that you weren't even expecting. As you're losing weight, your autoimmune disease starts to get better. Your sleep gets better. You become more fertile. Your libido gets better. Everything gets better because it's all connected, right? And so the second thing is don't let convenience be the enemy, right? Like you have to fight against it. And this means swimming upstream. And increasingly, I think in our lives today, this is a broader statement than just food. I think the more intentionality with which we live our lives, the better our lives become. If you do what everyone else does, you get what everyone else gets. And most people in our society, most of our brothers and sisters are obese and sick and unhealthy and becoming increasingly infertile. And that is not what we want. We have to lift them out. We have to bring them with us, our families, our friends. We have to be the beacon in our communities to bring people out of this kind of despair that we are in. So if we go with the flow, we will end up with what everyone gets. I think that was one of the major like motivators for me growing up was I saw my dad sick. You know, he was a doctor. I saw him sick at an early age. He had a heart attack when he was 44. You know, I'm 47. You know, it's just, I didn't want to have obesity like my dad and sleep apnea like my dad and heart attack, you know, and I saw my grandparents and they had arthritis and they were not able to move. And I thought, that's not what I want. But that is the path that we go to. Whatever illnesses your parents have, you will have those illnesses if you continue to live in the way that everyone lives. And it's up to us to we have to swim upstream on the convenience piece, you know, and hopefully some of the things I've built will make that easier for people at some levels like Lineage. But basically we have to rebel against convenience, which means making your food when you can, packing food with you, looking for high quality foods. I mean, gosh, it's a rebellion today to go to a grocery store, Shawn. You know, if you go to a grocery store and cook your own food, you are a rebel. Congratulations. I want to be your friend. I want to give you a high five because that is one of the most rebellious, but one of the most powerful things you could ever do today is just go to a grocery store and cook your own food. And the third thing is, to your point, when we eat, if we're thinking about sleep, you don't want to eat too close when you go to sleep, right? Give it 2 or 3 hours. And I think that there's differences in genetics in terms of how we respond to that morning time, right? Some people probably do better with intermittent fasting than other people. I don't do well with it. I feel best when I eat first thing in the morning. And I think we know we get this cortisol awakening response, a natural spike in cortisol when we wake up. And for some people, when they do intermittent fasting in the morning, that cortisol persists later in the morning. So if you don't eat in the morning, you're going to get more cortisol later in the morning, which is probably not a great thing. I think some people probably have the genetics and they respond very well to intermittent fasting. I would say know your body and experiment on both ways. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot, is how much I'm constantly humbled by the bioindividuality between humans. You know, I think for a while I thought we're all the same. We all just need to eat meat. And boy, was I wrong. You know, like I've tried to evolve and learn from this, but I think there are probably some people that do better with high fat, low carb. Some people that do better with low carb, high fat, you know, or high carb, low fat, both sides of the spectrum. You know, I think we know how much protein we need. When it comes to food and individuality, we know, okay, like 0.8 grams of protein per pound of goal body weight, that's pretty solid. Get your protein, leverage the protein, use high quality protein that has micronutrients as opposed to low quality protein with a bunch of fake ingredients that are going to give you like gas with discharge and anal spotting. You don't want fake fats in your protein. Protein bars are not the solution. But once you figure out how much protein, you kind of just need to figure out, am I going to be a high fat person, or am I going to be like a high carb person, or am I going to be somewhere in the middle? Because there's probably those 3 phenotypes. But I think that in the same vein, when we eat is probably very individual. Some people do well with like no food in the morning. And some people it's really going to crash your hormones and stuff. And so see what works best for you. But I think most people are going to do better if you don't eat within you want to stop eating at least 2 hours before you go to sleep. That's what I would say on the timing.
Fantastic advice. You know, I got to tell you, man, one of the things that I appreciate about you, and you just shared it, like you said the words, like I was wrong. Some people get mad at you and don't like you because, which first of all, just saying somebody doesn't like you is, but you're an awesome guy. But just because you change and evolve your perspective on certain things. And I think that means you're a smart person. Because like you're learning and you're experimenting and you're figuring things out and you're sharing it and you stay true. There's certain principles that are true because they've been true forever. Like it's just a part of like how stuff works here on planet Earth.
Yeah.
But just being able to evolve your beliefs and your perspectives and your teaching and what you're advocating for. And all the while, it's the heart of like advocating for us and advocating for humanity and having that bedrock underneath everything. So I appreciate you, man, for being that person, because somebody has to do that. Like, this is what I thought at one time. This is what I believe today, based on like I was open and I took in the information and I experimented and I looked at things and I worked with people. And yes, this is where I'm at today and I'm continuing to evolve. That's a masterful life, man.
Thank you. I mean, it's been humbling, you know, but it's been good. And I think that there are people who do really well on a carnivore diet. And I learned for myself that carbohydrates are great, you know, like adding fruit and honey made me feel way better than strict carnivore. So I think that, but you know, what's interesting about carnivore is that like, I think that like I forget where it's from, but there's a quote that says, don't say that I have the truth, but that I have a truth, right? So I think there is a truth in keto. There's a truth in carnivore. There's probably a truth. There's a truth in veganism. There's a truth in plant-based. All of these things have a truth, and we try to bring them all together in some ways. Some people are going to benefit from a vegan diet because they cut out all these processed foods. I think a lot of people benefit from carnivore in terms of autoimmune stuff. And that was my original enthusiasm was, hey, my eczema went away when I went to just meat. And then I humbly learned a year and a half later, hey, long-term keto doesn't work for my body, but it works for some people. So yeah, I'm trying to keep humble and keep learning, and people can criticize me all they want for that. I'm never going to have all the answers. I'm just trying to share how I put things together. And I think it's fun to try and connect the dots.
Yeah, I love this, man. Well, can you let everybody know where they can connect with you, get more information, and yeah, all the good stuff?
Yeah, so I am at Paul Saladino MD on all the socials. And we talked a little about Lineage today. If they want convenient, like super high quality grass-fed meat stuff, it's at lineageprovisions.com.
Amazing.
Thank you, brother.
Man.
It's good to see you.
I appreciate you. Anytime.
Thank you, man.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
These oils are promoting toxin formation in the factory. They promote more toxin formation as they sit on the shelves. When you cook with them, when you open the bottle, why is that happening? It has to do with their chemistry.